The stench of the market clung heavy, a suffocating cloak of dust and desperation. Heat shimmered off the cobblestones, blurring the edges of the anxious crowd. It was a day for transactions, not for mercy. Then a young girl was led forward, her face bruised, her frame perceived as a burden. She was to be sold, a chattel in a land that claimed freedom. From the shadows, a lone mountain man watched, his stoic face a mask. His own past, a tapestry of loss, pulsed with silent fury. Could such a raw act of cruelty be allowed to stand? Was there no justice for the vulnerable in a world consumed by greed? We are a family of listeners, bound by stories that speak of courage, compassion, and the enduring human spirit. Tell us, where are you listening from today? Share your location in the comments, and together, let us affirm the values we hold dear. The marketplace buzzed with flies and whispers. Dust motes danced in the searing sunlight, coating every stall, every face. Wagon wheels groaned past, their creaking a mournful rhythm against the hawkers' cries. Elias Thorne stood apart, his broad shoulders hunched, his gaze distant. He had come down from the high peaks for salt and flour, an annual necessity. He found little comfort in the clamor of civilization. His solace lay in the quiet solitude of the mountains, a silence where old sorrows could be held at bay. His attention snagged, however, on a disturbance near the town square's makeshift auction block. A man in a tight-fitting suit, Percival Finch, a railroad agent by reputation, held court. Finch's voice, sharp and oily, cut through the din. Elias had heard rumors of Finch's dealings, his acquisition of properties, his ruthless efficiency. This scene felt different, darker. A girl, perhaps 15, was shoved onto the rough-hewn platform. Her dress was soiled, her hair matted. Her face was swollen, her eyes wide with a terror that clawed at Elias's chest. He noted the heavy set of her shoulders, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, a physical manifestation of her fear. Finch droned on about debts, about an unpaid passage, about family obligations. He spoke of her as if she were a piece of livestock, detailing her perceived inadequacies, her lack of value. Alara heard the words, each one a stone thrown at her already shattered dignity. A burden, Finch called her, unfit for service, yet possessing a robust constitution. He made her perceived size a point of derision, a reason for her disposability. Her throat was tight, choked by unshed tears. She glared at the faces in the crowd, a sea of indifference, judgment, and curiosity. No one met her gaze. No one spoke for her. She was alone, utterly adrift in a hostile world. Finch held up a crumpled document, proclaiming its legality, its binding nature. He spoke of transferring her servitude to the highest bidder. Alara understood. She was being sold, not into employment but into a life owned by another. Her fate was being bartered away, openly, in the merciless glare of the sun. Shame burned hotter than the summer heat. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his gut. It was the same hollow ache he had carried for years, a reminder of what he had lost. His wife, his daughter, taken by a fever that swept through the valley, leaving him a solitary monument to grief. He had seen helplessness before, the kind that preceded an irreversible breaking. This girl, her terror so stark, echoed a vulnerability he knew intimately. His hand instinctively tightened on the worn leather pouch at his belt. Finch's voice rose, demanding bids. The crowd stirred, some shifting uncomfortably, others merely observing. A few snickers rippled through the onlookers. No one stepped forward. The girl trembled, her shoulders shaking. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if wishing herself invisible, wishing the world would simply swallow her whole. The silence stretched, thick with her unspoken dread. $2. A voice rumbled, low and deliberate. The sound cut through the oppressive quiet like an axe through dry wood. All heads turned. Elias stepped forward from the shadows, his presence commanding, almost unnatural in the bustling square. His tall frame was lean, hardened by years of mountain life. He moved with a quiet power that drew all eyes. His weathered face was unreadable, his eyes, the color of cold river stone, fixed on Finch. Percival Finch paused, a sneer twisting his lips. He sized up the mountain man, dismissing him as a crude bumpkin. $2. Finch scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. For this property? Is that all you value human life, stranger? He gestured dismissively at Alara, whose head snapped up, her eyes wide with a fresh surge of terror. Elias ignored the taunt. He met Finch's gaze, his own unwavering. $2, he repeated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He reached into his pouch, pulling out $2 silver, their gleam stark against his calloused palm. He held them out, an offering and a challenge. His intent was clear. He was not bargaining for a price. He was ending a desecration. Finch hesitated, thrown off balance by the unexpected bid and Elias's intensity. This was not the kind of transaction he was accustomed to. He preferred his victims to be desperate, compliant. This man radiated an unsettling calm. Finch snatched the coins, examining them as if they might be counterfeit. He stuffed them into his waistcoat pocket with a grudging air. Sold, then, Finch announced, his voice lacking its usual triumphant ring. He gestured at Alara. Take your property, stranger. You got a bargain. If you ask me, he offered a mocking bow, a thin smile playing on his lips. He believed he had won, ridding himself of a problem for a pittance. Elias walked to the platform. Alara flinched as he approached, anticipating another rough hand, another cruel word. She kept her head bowed, her heavy frame trembling. Elias reached for her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle, firm. He did not pull her, merely offered a steady anchor. His gaze, once fixed on Finch, now shifted to her. A faint frown creased his brow. Come, he said, his voice a quiet invitation, not a command. Alara looked up, bewildered. She saw no contempt in his eyes, only a strange, compelling stillness. He had bought her. The thought sent a fresh wave of despair through her, but it was mixed with a flicker of something else, something she couldn't name. He was not like the others. He did not leer. He did not shout. He simply waited. She followed him, stumbling slightly as she descended the steps. The crowd parted, murmuring. Some stared openly, curious about the strange pair. Others averted their eyes, uncomfortable. Elias paid them no mind. He led her away from the square, towards the outskirts of town, his stride long and steady. He did not look back. Alara struggled to keep pace. Her dress, thick and heavy, chafed against her skin. The crude sack, thrown over her head when she was brought to the square, muffled her senses, but the light filtering through the coarse weave was blinding. Her breath hitched with each step. She had been bound, gagged, and hauled from a dank cellar only hours ago. Now she was free of the chains, but still utterly captive. They reached the edge of town, where the dust roads gave way to rocky trails leading into the hills. Elias paused beside a sturdy pack horse laden with supplies. He turned to her. His eyes, though unyielding, held no malice. He reached out slowly, deliberately, for the rough burlap sack. Alara tensed, bracing for a blow. Instead, his calloused fingers carefully untied the knot at the base of the sack. He lifted it. The blinding sunlight assaulted her eyes. She blinked, tears streaming, as the world exploded into color and sharp lines. The dust, the distant mountains, the quiet man who stood before her. She saw his face clearly now, the deep lines etched by sun and sorrow, the kind eyes that held an unexpected depth. He had expected to find a child, perhaps a sickly one, given Finch's disparaging words. Instead, he saw a young woman, not as he had imagined. She was not slight, but her frame was strong, her features fine beneath the dirt and bruising. Her hair, a rich chestnut, tumbled in tangles around her shoulders. Her eyes, startlingly blue, held a raw, untamed intelligence. This was not a burden. This was a person, vibrant and deeply wounded, Elias felt a profound shift within him. The protective instinct he had felt earlier solidified into something far deeper. He had intervened out of a general sense of justice. Now, he felt a specific, profound responsibility. Alara stared at him, her chest heaving. She saw his surprise, though his expression remained mostly stoic. She saw the question in his eyes, the unasked query. Who was she? Why was she there? She could not speak. Her voice felt trapped, throttled by fear. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. He simply waited. He turned from her, his gaze sweeping the horizon, assessing the trail ahead. "We ride," he stated, his voice quiet, almost a murmur against the vastness of the mountains. He motioned to the second horse, a sturdy mare tethered behind the pack animal. He helped her mount, his hands again gentle but firm. Alara hesitated, then swung her leg over the saddle. The movement was stiff, unpracticed. The journey into the mountains was a blur of exhaustion and awe for Alara. The air grew cooler, cleaner, smelling of pine and damp earth. The dusty, suffocating world of the town receded. They climbed steadily, the path narrowing, winding through ancient forests. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. Elias rode ahead, a silent sentinel, always watchful. He offered her water from his canteen, a simple gesture of care. Alara drank greedily, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. He offered her dried meat and hardtack. She ate slowly, savoring the taste, the first proper food she had consumed in days. He asked her nothing. His silence was a comfort, not a demand. It allowed her space to breathe, to simply be. As dusk painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, they reached a small, secluded cabin nestled deep in a mountain clearing. Smoke curled from its stone chimney. The scent of wood smoke, warm and comforting, enveloped her. This was his home. It was small, sturdy, built of rough-hewn logs, with a single window facing the peaks. Inside, a fire crackled merrily in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air was filled with the earthy scent of wood and dried herbs. It was sparse, but clean. A simple cot with a wool blanket sat in one corner. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a small cupboard completed the furnishings. Elias moved with quiet efficiency, rekindling the fire, setting a pot to boil. He brought her a tin plate of stew, thick with root vegetables and venison. Alara ate slowly, her hunger an aching void. The warmth of the food spread through her, chasing away the pervasive chill that had settled deep in her bones. She watched him, still silent, still observant. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile trust began to bloom. Elias taught her how to tend the fire, how to prepare simple meals. He taught her to recognize edible plants, to track small game. He did not push her. He merely guided patiently. Alara, in turn, began to emerge from her shell. Her fear slowly receded, replaced by a quiet curiosity. One evening, a storm raged outside, rattling the small cabin. Alara sat by the fire, mending a tear in her dress. Elias was carving a small wooden bird, his knife moving with precise, practiced movements. The silence was companionable. Alara found herself speaking, her voice rough from disuse. Why did you buy me?" she asked, the question tumbling out before she could stop it. Elias paused, his knife still. He looked at the wooden bird in his hand, then at the fire. "No one should be sold," he said, his voice quiet, gruff. "No one should be property." He looked at her then, his gaze steady. "It reminded me." Alara waited. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice tinged with a raw pain. "My wife, my daughter, taken, not by man but by sickness." Sudden, like a theft, he looked away, his eyes distant, haunted. "They were everything. I had nothing left. I came here, to be alone, to forget," he sighed, a heavy sound. "But you were like them, small, defenseless, wronged." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Alara understood. He had acted not out of charity, but out of a deep-seated empathy, a wound that still festered. The days continued in a rhythm of quiet tasks. Alara, discovering a forgotten skill, began to draw. She used charcoal from the fire, sketching the cabin, the mountains, the small animals she saw. She even sketched Elias, capturing his stoic profile with surprising accuracy. He saw her drawings, a faint flicker of approval in his eyes. He recognized her inner world, her capacity for beauty, and her resilience. One morning, Elias returned from a hunt, his expression grim. "Finch," he stated, his voice tight. He was asking questions. "In the lower valley." Said he knew where I lived. A cold dread settled in Alara's stomach. The past she thought she had escaped was closing in. Elias had gone into town for supplies. He had hoped for discretion, for silence. But Finch had tracked him. The man's reach extended further than Elias had anticipated. Finch's inquiries were pointed, probing. He had demanded to know about the girl Elias had supposedly bought. He had insinuated that Elias was harboring a runaway, that the transaction was invalid, a pretense. Elias knew Finch's game. The man dealt in power, in control. He wouldn't let Alara go, not after Elias had publicly defied him. He viewed Alara as his property, a symbol of his authority. Elias had to think. Finch would use the law or his twisted interpretation of it as a weapon. Elias knew one person in town who might offer counsel beyond the limited justice of Sheriff Brody. He led Alara down a less traveled path, towards a small, neat cottage on the edge of the woods. Maud Everly was a midwife, a healer, and the unofficial conscience of the valley. Her reputation for wisdom and integrity was unchallenged. Maud, a woman with keen, intelligent eyes and a kind, weathered face, greeted them with a quiet welcome. Elias briefly explained the situation, his words clipped, direct. Maud listened, her expression thoughtful, occasionally nodding. She observed Alara closely, her gaze compassionate, discerning. "Percival Finch," Maud mused, her voice low. "He is a wolf in sheep's clothing, Elias. He uses papers and laws to steal from the vulnerable." She shook her head. "He controls the deeds to half the valley. The railroad's expansion has given him too much power." Maud explained that Finch had a ledger, a record of all his illicit dealings, his usurious loans, his fraudulent land acquisitions. She had heard whispers of it, but no one had ever seen it. "He claimed Alara was his ward, orphaned and indebted," Maud continued. "He intended to sell her, not just for labor, but for marriage to an unsavory character." A final, cruel blow. Alara gasped softly. The truth of Finch's monstrous plan finally laid bare. "The transaction was a sham," Maud confirmed. "Even if you offered money, Finch cannot legally sell a person. But he has manipulated the law, twisting words on paper. He will demand her back." Citing some obscure statute, Maud knew Finch would likely challenge Elias's claim, demanding Alara's return, threatening Elias with legal action, perhaps even imprisonment for kidnapping. Elias's jaw tightened. He had to stop Finch. But how? Finch operated within the perceived legitimacy of the law. Elias had no such leverage. Maud's eyes, however, held a spark of an idea. "The ledger," she whispered. "If we could find it, it would expose him. It would unravel his entire scheme." The risk was enormous. Finch kept the ledger in his office, a heavily guarded room in the railroad building. It was a fortress of paper and locked doors. But the stakes were higher. Alara's freedom, her very life, depended on it. Elias knew what he had to do. He would go for the ledger. He set a deadline, Elias stated, his voice grim. 3 days. To return Alara to him. Or face the consequences. The urgency was palpable. They had to act swiftly. The clock was ticking. That night, Elias moved through the sleeping town like a shadow. He bypassed the main street, sticking to the alleys, his steps silent. He knew the layout of the railroad building from his infrequent trips. He found a loose window at the back, a small opening obscured by overgrown bushes. He slipped inside, the darkness absolute. He navigated by feel, his hands brushing against cold wood, rough plaster. He found Finch's office, the lock on the door sturdy. He worked with practiced ease, his fingers deft. The click was barely audible in the profound silence. Inside, the office smelled of stale tobacco and ink. He moved to the desk, running his hands over its surface. His fingers closed around the cold leather of a large book. The ledger. As he retrieved it, a floorboard creaked upstairs. He froze, his senses on high alert. A faint light appeared under the door to the office. Someone was stirring. Elias slipped back into the shadows, clutching the ledger. He knew he had minutes, maybe seconds, before he was discovered. He found his way back to the window, sliding out into the night just as a door creaked open inside the building. He melted back into the darkness, the ledger heavy in his hand. Back at Maud's cottage, the next morning, the ledger lay open on the table, its pages filled with Finch's meticulous, damning script. Maud's face grew grimmer with each line she read. "Fraud," she murmured. "Extortion. Usury. He has cheated so many. Driven families from their land. Ruined lives." The ledger was a litany of Finch's corruption, proving his intent to exploit and dehumanize. Alara sat beside Maud, listening, her hand trembling as she touched the aged paper. The meticulous records of her own sale were there, cold and precise. It validated her ordeal, gave substance to her terror. This was the proof they needed. But proof was not enough. They needed the town to listen. Maud knew the task ahead. Winning the town meant overcoming entrenched prejudice and fear of authority. Many were indebted to Finch or feared his influence. They had to appeal to their sense of justice, their shared humanity. Maud began with the closest neighbors, those she had helped through births and illnesses. She spoke with quiet conviction, detailing Finch's crimes, showing them snippets from the ledger. Initially, there was hesitation. Some dismissed her, fearing retribution. Others simply did not believe that a man like Finch could be so openly corrupt. "He holds the law," they argued. "His papers are legal," but Maud, with her unwavering gaze and her deep moral authority, chipped away at their doubt. She brought Alara with her, not as a spectacle, but as a quiet testament to the truth. Alara, still reticent, found a different voice. She did not speak of her terror, but of her simple longing for a life of her own. She showed them her charcoal drawings, scenes of mountain peace, of quiet strength. Her art spoke volumes of the person Finch had tried to crush. It was a subtle, powerful counter-narrative to his accusations of her being a useless burden. Old Man Hemlock, the grizzled blacksmith, initially scoffed. "A mountain man and a girl? What mischief are you two cooking up?" But Maud, standing tall, met his cynical gaze. "Misery, Abel, that's what. The misery Percival Finch has spread like a plague." She laid out the ledger, pointing to a record of Hemlock's own father, revealing a fraudulent debt that had cost his family their ancestral land. Hemlock's eyes widened in dawning understanding, then narrowed in a fury. News of the ledger, and Finch's true dealings, spread like wildfire. The town, accustomed to Finch's ruthless efficiency, began to see him through new eyes. The fear was replaced by outrage. Many had suffered small injustices at his hands, dismissed as mere business. Now they saw a pattern of deliberate cruelty. The community, once hesitant, began to coalesce. Support began to pour in. Mrs. Gable, the baker, brought fresh loaves of bread to Maud's house, her eyes filled with sympathy for Alara. Young boys, emboldened, offered to stand watch around the cottage. The local dry goods merchant, who had always seemed aloof, supplied blankets and tea. These small acts, woven together, formed a tapestry of growing solidarity. Even Sheriff Brody, a man of cautious temperament, came to Maud's door. He saw the ledger, undeniable proof of Finch's criminal enterprise. "This changes things, Maud," he said, his voice grave. "This changes everything." He promised to uphold justice, not Finch's twisted version of it. In the quiet evenings at Maud's, Alara and Elias found a different kind of solace. Alara, no longer hiding, would tell Elias about her childhood, the fleeting moments of joy before tragedy struck. Elias, in turn, shared stories of the mountains, their silent majesty, their enduring strength. He showed her constellations, naming them, and describing the old tales tied to their patterns. One night, Alara finished a drawing of him, a profile etched in charcoal against the stark white paper. She held it out to him. "It is good," she whispered. Elias took it, his gaze lingering on the image. He saw the truth she had captured, the quiet sadness, but also the resolute strength. He looked at her then, a rare, soft light in his eyes. "You have a gift," he said, his voice husky. "A true gift," their connection. Forged in crisis, deepened into something profound, something akin to family. The day of the hearing dawned clear and cold. Word had spread through the valley. The town hall was packed, standing room only. Faces filled with apprehension, curiosity, and a growing sense of unified purpose. Percival Finch stood at the front, impeccably dressed, an arrogant smile fixed on his face. Sheriff Brody stood beside him, his expression grim. Finch began, his voice smooth and persuasive. He held up a copy of his manipulated papers, citing statutes, legal precedents. He painted Elias as a rogue, a kidnapper, a man who had defied the law. He described Alara as a runaway, a burden, a problem child who belonged under his care, bound by legitimate debt. He spoke of his own philanthropic efforts, twisting his exploitative acts into virtuous deeds. The crowd murmured, some wavering under Finch's polished performance. But then Maud Everly stepped forward. She held the real ledger, its worn leather cover stark against her simple dress. She spoke, her voice clear and resonant, detailing Finch's true business dealings, line by damning line. She laid bare his frauds, his usury, his ruthless acquisition of land through deceit. He claimed this young woman was his ward, indebted a burden, Maud declared, her voice ringing with indignation. But he trafficked in human lives. He sought to sell Alara into a forced marriage, a fate worse than any debt. A gasp rippled through the hall. Then Alara herself stepped forward. She had shed the soiled dress, now wearing a simple, clean garment provided by Maud. She stood tall, no longer shrinking from the gaze of the crowd. Her voice, though soft, carried through the hushed hall. "He called me a burden," she said, her voice gaining strength, "because I challenged his lies, because I refused to be silent." She spoke of the cellar, the chains, the fear. She spoke of the man who had bought her not for profit, but for kindness. "He holds papers," Alara said, her gaze fixed on Finch. "But I hold the truth. I am not property. I am a person. I choose my own path now." Her words resonated with an undeniable power, stripping Finch of his carefully constructed facade of legality. The crowd stirred, a wave of outrage sweeping through them. Sheriff Brody stepped forward, holding the authentic ledger aloft. "Percival Finch," he stated, his voice booming. "This ledger, corroborated by the testimony of these good people, shows a pattern of criminal activity far beyond simple debt collection. You have defrauded this town. You have exploited its most vulnerable. And you have no legal claim to Alara, or to anyone." The crowd erupted. Shouts of "arrest him" and "justice" filled the hall. Finch's face paled, his arrogance crumbling. He tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The community, once silent, now stood as one, a formidable force against corruption. Finch, overwhelmed, was quickly apprehended by the sheriff's deputies. His reign of manipulation brought to an abrupt and public end. Percival Finch's defeat was swift and absolute. Stripped of his forged documents and his power, he was jailed, awaiting trial for fraud and conspiracy. The railroad company, embarrassed by the scandal, disavowed him, distancing themselves from his illicit dealings. Justice, long delayed, had finally come. Outside the town hall, the air was crisp, cleansed. The crowd dispersed, their faces now filled with a quiet triumph. Elias stood with Alara and Maud, a silent pillar of strength. Alara looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. But these were tears of gratitude, not fear. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Elias reached out, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "You saved yourself, Alara," he said, his gaze warm. "You found your voice." He looked at Maud, a rare smile touching his lips. "And you, Maud, you lit the way." Maud smiled, her eyes twinkling. "We all played our part, Elias. This town, this valley, it will be better now. Stronger." That evening, back at Elias's cabin, a quiet peace settled over them. The fire glowed, casting a warm light. Alara drew in her sketchbook images of the mountains and the determined faces of the townspeople filling the pages. Elias sat across from her, carving another small bird, his movements slow and rhythmic. The silence between them was no longer empty, but full, rich with unspoken understanding. Their lives had intertwined, forged by an act of defiance and a shared journey towards healing. Elias, the reclusive mountain man, had found a new purpose, a new connection to the world he had abandoned. The protective instinct he felt for Alara had blossomed into a profound, parental love. Alara, the wronged survivor, had found not just safety, but a voice, a home, and a family built not on blood or law, but on choice, on kindness, and on shared experience. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Alara continued her art, her sketches becoming more confident, more expressive. Elias, no longer a solitary figure, taught her the ways of the mountains, sharing his knowledge of the wilderness. He taught her resilience. She taught him to smile again. The cabin, once a place of quiet retreat from loss, became a haven of life, laughter, and hope. One afternoon, the blacksmith, Abel Hemlock, rode up to the cabin. He brought a freshly forged iron pot, heavy and gleaming. "For the new additions," he rumbled, his gruff voice softer than usual. He nodded at Alara, a respectful acknowledgement. "Anything you need, Elias. Just ask." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of community acceptance, of a town that had learned its lesson. The world outside had changed not just for them, but because of them. In the quiet solitude of the mountains, a new home had been built, brick by brick, act by act, a testament to mercy, courage, and the unbreakable bond of a chosen family. It was a story not just of survival, but of true belonging, a melody of hope echoing through the tranquil peaks. Thank you for joining our family of listeners. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing. We bring you new stories of courage and compassion every day.